Hey there, how you doing? It's Dave Corlett here, the business director at Shapeby, and this is episode number 44 of the Changemakers. Now, if you would have asked me what my perfect topic to talk about with the perfect guest would be right now, this would 100% be it. It's no secret at all. I'm a massive brand geek, so I will take any opportunity to talk about the evolution of brand and how brands express themselves, especially with luminaries of the creative industries like my guest today, because Nick Levesque is the creative director at Asana. And since he joined the business, he's embarked on a really significant brand evolution, which is just about to go live as we speak right now. Super exciting stuff. And Nick was so kind to join me on the Changemakers to talk about that process from an internal point of view. And also his thoughts on why and how brands need to continually evolve and to express themselves, especially in the world of B2B that he spent a lot of time in, and obviously that we at Shapeby operate in for the vast majority of the time. So again, I won't give too much away as usual. All I will say is that honestly, and I'm not just saying this because this is the latest episode, this is genuinely one of my favorite ever conversations on the Changemakers. Nick's a great guest. He really, really knows his stuff. Asana is a fascinating brand and always has been to me, particularly around their distinctive assets, which we talk a lot about in this podcast. So I was so excited to have this conversation, and it absolutely did not disappoint. So here we go. This is episode number 44 of The Changemakers with Nick Levesque, the creative director at Asana. Welcome to the Changemakers. This is our episode with the wonderful Nick Levesque from Asana. Nick's the creative director over there, and today we are talking all about the wonderful subject, well, I certainly think so anyway, wonderful subject of brand evolution. Just before we dive into it, I think it's worth saying that I hear this a lot. Rebrand is a dirty word. It's a filthy word for some people. They hate it. It's really, really disconcerting. It's uncomfortable. And I think a lot of the times, to be brutally honest with you, and I think Nick might agree with me here, it's unnecessary. You know, sometimes really, unless there's a huge, huge problem with your brand, with the way that you're perceived, with the way that you're viewed in the market, what's often better to keep things fresh is a bit more of a brand evolution. And that's exactly what we're going to be tackling today with Nick. So Nick, huge warm welcome to the Changemakers. How are you doing today?
Cool. Super great. Thanks for having me, Dave.
Awesome. Really, really excited to dive into this whole thorny subject with you and actually hear a really exciting insider's view of how Asana is tackling this issue right now as we speak. But before we dive into that, just for anyone who has just arrived from a different solar system and somehow doesn't know who Asana are and what they do, could you just run through that with us really quickly?
Yeah, sure. So at Asana, we like to say that we are a work management platform. And so we connect all of a company's work from all the way up from, company goals, all the way down to the day-to-day work that folks are working on.
Nice, nice. And how long have you been there?
So I just hit my 2-year mark a couple weeks ago.
Nice, awesome, congratulations!
Thank you.
And as I imagine people really want to hear, what's happening right now at Asana is you guys are going through a pretty big brand evolution. But I kind of wanted to start with getting into this thorny subject of rebrand versus brand refresh, brand evolution, whatever you want to call it. I mean, for you, what are the key differences?
Yeah, you mentioned, the term rebrand is a bit of a dirty word, kind of a triggering word here, but I think only because I think it implies something a little bit more drastic, right? So for me, I think a rebrand is more about it's changing your identity. It's who you are. And so a brand identity, I think, is a little bit more timeless. It's who we are. It's what we stand for as a brand. And so all of our company decisions, our products, our marketing are going to be really timely expressions of that identity. And so I think a rebrand is needed when, you want to change something, you want to change who you are. And so a refresh is sort of more in the mode of what we're doing right now. And so it's changing our expression. It's how we want to present ourselves. And so we like to describe brand expression more like, a wardrobe. So we might outgrow some things and our style might change, a little bit, but who we are and what we stand for kind of remains the same, So a refresh is more like switching up your clothes.
Yeah. I like that. That's a really good analogy, actually. So I guess my next question would be, yeah, if we sort of follow that analogy, and a refresh is a bit more like, changing your wardrobe, switching up, freshening it up for a new season kind of thing. What are some of the kind of signals that indicate you might need to, I don't know, get your credit card out and head over to the mall?
Yeah. For me personally, it's like going from an emo phase in high school to maybe wearing a button-up linen shirt. But I think evolving a brand is really just in response to growing up or maybe even outgrowing something. I think there are a couple common reasons that I see why that happens. So for one, I think a big one is an audience change. You want to, set a new target, a new audience. A super timely example of this is, the brand Impossible, the plant-based meat company. I think a couple of weeks ago they went through a rebrand and they changed all of their branding and packaging from green to sort of red, and even their trade show booth presence, it looks a bit more like a meat counter. So they really want to target a new audience. They want to target, meat lovers as well. So I think an audience shift or a change or trying to target a new audience is a really, really large one. I also think a product offering change, if you want to evolve your capabilities or your vision of of your company. I used to work for a CMO who's now the CEO of Host Analytics, and they changed their name from Host Analytics to Planful. And I think they really just wanted to emphasize that they're about planning and decision making more over than just literal analytics. I also think maybe there's a cultural change or there's a societal change. When I first joined Zendesk a couple of years prior, they had rebranded and got rid of their Buddha mascot, which at the time, felt a little inappropriate. It's even more inappropriate now, but I think cultural shifts, make brands want to sort of change as well. Um, a few other ones I see are, competition. Maybe competition is creeping up and you want to sort of differentiate yourself again. Positioning for IPO, which was kind of the case for the first tech company I ever worked at. And maybe there's it's not ideal, but maybe there's a leadership change. I think a famous example is, Elon Musk changing Twitter to X. I don't know if there was, a large specific reason other than he wanted to do it. So I think we should acknowledge that happens as well. But I'm sure there are many more reasons, but I'm super curious. You're on the agency side of it. What are the most common reasons that you see for brand evolution?
Yeah, it's an interesting point, actually. Obviously, like you say, there are usually quite a few. And again, I think what I always point to is that every one of these processes is different. No two rebrands or brand refreshes are alike. And like you said, there are some pretty common reasons, but also those reasons differ ever so slightly. So for some of the more significant ones, it is a big problem. We're not perceived in the market the way that we need to be perceived or the way that we should be perceived. Our salespeople are having a hard time actually convincing people that we solve the problems that we do solve because the market doesn't see us that way. For others, it could be the problem is a little bit smaller, like you said. It's an audience shift. We need to shift to target a new audience, and we're not quite positioned to be able to do that. And on the flip side of that, there are as I think we're going to touch on a little bit later, there's the more kind of almost like the purely visual refresh. So our visual identity is dated. We've not looked at it for a while. It's not evolved the way that it should. We are a different company now, but that's not kept pace with it. And ultimately, we need that to evolve so that we are a more mature business. So yeah, a range of different reasons, but I think it all comes down to a problem of some kind, whether that's a smaller problem or we're about to actually start a big pitch process for a company that have a really, really big perception problem in the market, and that would be a really interesting one to try and tackle. And absolutely, yeah. So speaking of all of this, then, so why is Asana going through a brand evolution right now?
Yeah, so I think one of the main reasons is our audience over the last few years for several years has really evolved, and so I think we are shedding our SMB small business image and assumption that that we're just a project management software. We're seen as a simple to-do list for individuals. I think we've matured so much as a company over the last few years, and our product has matured as well. And so as I mentioned in the beginning, the boilerplate, version of who we are is that, we're a platform that connects the goals that you set all the way at the top of your organization, all the way down to the cross-functional projects and the individual tasks, that support all of those strategies. So we have really, really large customers that rely on us to manage everything from that goal setting all the way, down to the tasks that folks are working on. So I think with that product framing, it comes a more enterprise audience and a move sort of up market. And it involved a shift in our tactics. We do a lot more thought leadership content and events these days. We even created our own research lab and think tank. And so I think what initially led us towards wanting to evolve our look, which has been a little bit of a journey. And so I think another reason is, we want to address consistency. I think in that journey up market, we've kind of experimented on the brand a little bit over the years, which led to, a few different iterations, but I think it was finally time to, commit to one consistent look and feel that we were all super proud of and that really best represented Asana and sort of met us where we are right now.
Nice. And is it just a look and feel exercise? Is it a verbal? Are you looking at tone of voice, messaging, positioning, all of that kind of stuff, or is that kind of set in stone?
Us, it's a little bit lighter. I think voice and tone we kind of keep a pulse on, pretty steadily. So for us, this was more of a visual refresh.
Nice. And just thinking about what you said there around kind of moving up market, I suppose, to looking at an enterprise audience. I mean, actually, going back to your question before, that is something that we look at quite a lot. We are asked by organizations to tackle a brand refresh because companies are looking to move from an SMB mid-market kind of offering and positioning to target enterprise. Actually, that was one of our first kind of big brand projects within tech was exactly that. We're looking to target more enterprise audience. We need to grow up a little bit. Mm-hmm. And so for you, what is the difference between targeting an enterprise audience versus, SMBs, mid-market, that kind of thing?
Yeah, for sure. I think when I think of B2B brands, there's kind of a little bit of a spectrum to play in that I see. I think on one side of the spectrum, we see almost like childlike branding, or it's less childlike, but it's more about making technology feel super approachable. And so I think about like the illustrations in the building block logo of like a Notion. Or on the other end of the spectrum, there's this very sort of buttoned up look, not shying away from the technology, maybe more like an IBM. And so Asana maybe at one point, in our history, maybe leaned a little bit more in that first end of the spectrum. But I think over time, we've evolved slightly closer, maybe to the other side. And so I think that's perfectly natural, for a lot of software companies, because really in the early days, brands are a bit, they're irreverent, they're attention grabbing, they're really trying to build this cult-like love for their product. I think of MailChimp, in the early days of MailChimp and following them on Instagram. They had their mascot, their monkey mascot, I think Freddie, and they used to put them in sort of little scenes on Instagram, and folks thought that was so fun. And for us, we had our own sort of creatures. We have unicorns, narwhals, and yetis, but when we're talking about maturing as a brand and going a little bit more upmarket, our goals sort of shift. We're trying to build confidence, with the folks that we're talking to. And so I think that shows up in a few different, ways. We talked about copy. I think our copy now speaks a little bit more to organizational and departmental impact, versus just individuals. We're doing a brand photo shoot today. And so in our photography, we're capturing folks that, maybe look like they have like 10, 20, 30 years of experience. And so when we refresh and revisited, our design principles as part of this refresh exercise, we really went from approachable to confident. We changed another principle from quirky to joyful. And so we didn't want to lose who we are as a company, but I think we found ways to ever so subtly shift, to be a bit more mature and ensure that we're resonating with, our audience as they mature as well.
Yeah, it's super interesting. I mean, you mentioned MailChimp there, and I think it's a good example of that subtle shift, because, I mean, I'm sure, I'd love to know what you think about this, but you mentioned there about, targeting slightly smaller, scrappier audiences and being a little bit more kind of irreverent and fun and kind of quirky. But I, the people that it's targeting are still people. They still engage with that kind of thing. So I think maybe it would be a little bit too much of a stretch to lose too much of that irreverence, I suppose. But at the same time, I know what you mean about having to be a little bit more mature and grown up. So are you finding that that's a challenge to kind of lose some of that irreverence, but not all of it?
Yeah, I mean, I like what you said. Our head of copy here always likes to say, we're a B2B company, but at the end of the B is made up of a bunch of C's, right? We're all people and humans at the end of the day. So um, we like to make sure that in our copy, in our tone, we're not using jargon. We're just talking, human to human, person to person. But I think that's part of the charm of what we do. I still love being able to bring a little bit of that irreverence and a little bit of that humor and into the work that we do. So I definitely, I don't see it as a challenge. I think it's something that all of us, as we sort of get into this enterprise market, want to sort of hold on to.
Yeah, definitely, absolutely, and I think that's definitely the right approach. It's a balance, isn't it? It's always a balance with these things. And actually, speaking of the process, I suppose, is there a particular playbook for approaching a kind of brand evolution challenge like this, or do you find that you have to do it in different ways? Going back to that point at the beginning, every process is different. So, is there a particular playbook for doing this kind of thing, or do you literally approach each one entirely independently of itself?
For sure, yeah. I mean, as you mentioned, even for me personally, every rebrand exercise that I've been through, it's been completely different, which kind of makes it more fun. But I think there's a few different ways I think that you can approach it, right? I think depending on the reason for it, there may be a super compelling, reason to make a swift change, right? Or some brands really just want to do a slow evolution and update, piece by piece over time. And I think at Asana we did maybe a little bit of both, right? So over time we evolved our layout guidelines, our photography, our illustration, and at the end of that work, I think we decided, we kind of want to do one sort of final push with an agency and refresh our colors and our typography and really put a bow on all of that work. Um, I also think, depending on where you're at and the resources that you have, maybe you want to tackle it in house, or maybe you want to work with an agency. I think I've been fortunate enough where I've gotten the opportunity to do both. And so, the first tech company I ever worked at, called Anaplan, we set up a conference room with several meter boards, in the room, where we pinned up a lot of inspiration and our progress, and we got to work on it in house for about 3 months, full time. We hired a couple of contractors to support the day to day work. So that was super fun. That was really exciting. I hope every designer gets the opportunity to do that at some point in their career. But also at Asana here, we really wanted to find an agency partner to work with, which I also think is a great approach. We've spoke to about, I think, 6 different agencies, but ultimately chose to work with Collins, which was very, very exciting. I don't need to explain to this audience, why we chose them, but I think working with them was such a career bucket list item for me. So I'm glad we got the opportunity.
Nice, nice. And just on that point about agencies, do you have a particular? Because I think again, every creative leader and every kind of brand leader is slightly different on this. But do you have a preferred point in time, or point in project, or initial kind of part of the project almost, that you prefer to bring an agency and you say, right, we've done what we can in house, or this is the point in which we need to partner with an external agency, and why is that?
Um, I think it's going to depend sort of where you are at in the process, and what you need. I think luckily for us, we have, working with our brand marketing, folks over the last couple of years, we put in so much work on the strategy and defining, who we are, that, it didn't seem like we need to go that far back and revisit all of that work. So luckily this project for us, it made the most sense to more tackle the visual sort of side of it. But I imagine, for some companies, if they're going sort of through a rebrand exercise or refresh, maybe they do want to tackle those things. And maybe, I'm sure, you know for folks on the agency side, they love to, start at the very, beginning of the process and go through that whole journey with a company. So, yeah, I guess it depends.
Yeah. You say we love it. I mean, actually, to be honest with you, the other way around can be equally rewarding. I think sometimes you probably know as much as I do that the discovery and the strategic part of the process can be difficult.
That's
It can be difficult for internal teams, who know the stakeholders, and know and know the kind of company inside out, let alone for an agency coming in and having to do that pretty quickly. And sometimes, actually, to be honest with you, agencies get a bit of a bad rep for making the process take too long, feeding stuff back that was kind of already in place, kind of repetitive work that's already been done. But on the flip side of that, I don't want to do agencies down too much. There is also a really, really valuable part of it, which is that outsider's perspective, and also the process side of things as well, that a lot of agencies have down, which is really valuable. But I guess my point was that we actually often quite enjoy coming in when that part is done and dusted, and it's the challenge is how do we bring this to life? How do we make this really sing, and how do we make something amazing out of this strategic piece? And sometimes that can be a huge long strategy document. Sometimes it can just be a one-pager. But ultimately, the challenge there is to figure out, get to grips with it, and bring it to life. So, yeah, I suppose either or really is cool. I just wanted to also ask really about something that that's quite familiar in a lot of these projects, and I suppose it's a bit more of a long-term thing as well, not just the project itself, but on a constant basis. Obviously, you're going through this evolutionary process. You need some level of consistency within I want to say the new brand, or the new brand identity, to be able to make sure that everyone knows it's still you. Everyone, you don't lose the essence of what you're all about, but also either side of that, it's really, really crucial to have that wiggle room for experimentation. Are you building that into this process? Do you build it into these processes as you go along to make sure that that balance is always there? Or is it a bit of a challenge sometimes, especially when you're creating new stuff?
Yeah, for sure. I think if I were to say, what was our biggest buzzword this past year, I think it was definitely the word consistency. And so I think also, as I mentioned, I think part of this exercise was to just sort of reset a little bit of our foundations to be, more consistent in all in really the spirit of brand recognition. So, our use of color, how our color sort of shows up on our surfaces, how we treat our campaign visuals for the next couple of years. And so obviously this is super important because, we want buyers, to recognize Asana and really feel our presence in the world. Um, I'll give you an example. A couple of years ago at a company, I was in charge of picking an email platform, and we were sort of debating between MailChimp and another company who I won't mention because I don't want to drag them, but I hadn't even heard of the other company, and so I was like, of course we're going to go with MailChimp. And I think it was literally that week that I was walking down the street in San Francisco, and then I saw a billboard, for the other company, and I was like, oh, maybe they are, a legit company, but I ended up going with that other one. So that's kind of what we're dealing with, when we're talking about brand. We need to be in the memory of buyers, and so I think the more that we can show up consistently in all of our marketing, the more folks can start to piece and recognize, like, oh, that Asana, I've been seeing them everywhere. And so I think once we have that, solid foundation, we can definitely go back into that really highly creative space and build on that foundation. We can, build a little bit more of that irreverence, I think, back into the brand. But I think that's also a little bit of what we're, hoping to do with this refresh as well. But also on the flip side, while consistency, I think, is super important, I think equally important is, a bit of experimentation, in the brand. I think I have someone in my team who I always say, she's really, really great at finding the edges of our guidelines, but always, keeping them sort of within, which I think is super important. But I think, as long as we're doing that with guardrails, right? I think we have channels like performance marketing, events, and blog imagery, where historically those have been surfaces where I think it's sort of like ripe for experimentation. And so blog imagery specifically, it's kind of something that at Zendesk and Asana that I've used as a bit of a playground for the brand, you know. And so we redid the strategy of the blogs to emulate publications with a little bit more of a range, you know, of imagery. And really, the strategy was, you know, we wanted to celebrate the diversity of the content with imagery that kind of let each of those content pieces shine on their own. And so we created some guidelines that obviously collectively made all of that imagery feel like Zendesk or felt like Asana, but it kind of gave us some room to try new things, keep the brand fresh, and also kind of keep a pulse on what's relevant. So I also think when you're working in house, you work with so many talented artists and illustrators on the team, and they don't always get to flex those muscles depending on what our brand expression is. So I think it was a really, really great opportunity for the team really to experiment and use a bit of their illustration skills as well. So I think that approach, you know, it allows us to keep our core brand kind of intact while allowing some, you know, room for healthy experimentation.
Yeah, for sure. That person on your team who can find the edges, they're invaluable, aren't they?
Yeah, yes, for sure.
You know, somebody who just has that kind of mindset of, wonder if we could just take this in this direction. And actually, again, I'm not speaking from experience here, from an in-house point of view, but certainly from an agency point of view. Sometimes you get those people that kind of ask for forgiveness rather than permission and just go ahead and go, well, I just played with this. What do you think? And, you know, sometimes it's sometimes it's but at least, you know, they give it a go.
Yeah, she was showing me some designs yesterday for an awards program that we're doing, and she's like, I don't know, this might be too wild. And I was like, no, these are really cool. These are great.
Yeah. But that's it, isn't it? You know, sometimes you need those people that pull it out too far.
Mm-hmm.
They know it might have to get reined back in, but sometimes it's easier to do that than actually not going far enough and then having to iterate to build on that to get to that slightly more kind of that new place.
I love that. Yeah, I always say, you know, creative work is kind of like a pendulum. I'd rather sort of swing too far and have it, you know, settle somewhere in the middle than not push it far enough.
Yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to move on to a subject that, again, is so prevalent whenever we talk about these kinds of projects. And actually, it's really prevalent whenever we talk about in-house creative work as a whole, to be honest with you, because, you know, some people within the business will really get what you do and why you're doing it, not just in terms of this process, but you as a creative team. And honestly, you know, some people won't. Some people just that's not the way that their mind works. That's not the way that their brain works. So when you came in to Asana nearly 2 years ago, and you kind of realised that this was a process that needed to happen, how did you kind of sell that vision internally to, well, first of all, I suppose to your creative team, the people that do understand these processes, but, you know, again, I'm just guessing here, but maybe not all of them felt it was necessary. I don't know. But then also to, you know, especially stakeholders like the C-suite, you know, some of whom ultimately will sign off on the budget, but also really, really need convincing sometimes that these processes are worth the investment.
Yeah, for sure. So when I first joined Asana, I think, you know, there were certainly, you know, things that maybe I wanted to change about the brand that, you know, maybe I wasn't feeling were as successful maybe as they could be. But, you know, I think when you first join a company, you don't really want to be that person or that leader that kind of comes in and immediately is like, you know, wants to turn things over. I've certainly been on the other side of that, you know, as a designer, and it's not always fun. But so for a while, you know, I just you know, observed and eventually did a bit of a brand audit, you know, with the team. And so we took a FigJam file and pasted everything, you know, the team had made from the past year into that file. And so off to the side, I had this grid and with two columns, you know, on the left was observations and then the other was opportunities. And so the rows were all of our brand attributes, our personality, our audience, and how the brand is applied by, you know, way of like consistency, distinctiveness, and versatility. And so this really gave the team an opportunity to paste sticky notes, you know, base and offer their own, you know, observations and opportunities that they saw within the brand. And so this was such a great and fun exercise because it really allowed the whole team to surface things that were really on my mind to change as well. And so I think this brought, a little bit of, trust early on with the team that, what we were going to evolve, we would do it together.
And sorry, just one question here. When you say the team, do you mean just the creative team, or do you mean kind of
Yes.
creative
Yep.
marketing, product, different the team?
Actually, we did it. We did it with the creative team, and we invited some folks from our brand marketing team to participate in that as well. Because they have a lot of thoughts and feelings on the brand as well. So I think inviting our folks and some brand marketing folks to participate in an exercise like that really sort of kind of evened out the playing field and let us all weigh in on the brand.
Cool. Yeah, nice. And in terms of the C-suite as well, so moving outside of the team and then going, right, okay, so we've almost built a business case, or we have built a business case for this now. This could be the tricky part, taking it upstairs, taking it to other teams and saying, right, this is something we really feel is relevant. Obviously, I imagine it was softened slightly by the kind of the goal, as it were, to move towards an enterprise audience anyway. So, you may well have had kind of a rationale behind it there. But as you say, you came in and you instantly felt some stuff needed changing anyway. So was it a fairly easy conversation or not so much?
Yeah, it's definitely a different game when you got to go to the person that signs the checks. But I'd say for the C-suite, it's definitely easier when a project like this is initiated or even driven by the CMO, which was the case at Asana and the kind of the majority, I think, of the companies that I've worked at. And so I would say if you don't sort of have that initial buy-in and it truly is self-driven, I think just you have to have a compelling reason why, right? And we talked about a few examples, but it can't just be about sort of like what you like and dislike or about about the vibes. But I think I say that because ingrained in me is my college professor, in our crit, he would always say, never in this classroom should you say you like or you dislike something, right? Tell me why something is successful or it's unsuccessful. And so I think as you embark, on this, just really start with that strong business case. And like I mentioned earlier, I think luckily for us, this was such a long while in the making. And so it started with the brand marketing team refreshing our identity, refreshing our purpose and our attributes. They did some research on our distinctive brand assets. And we also worked with our marketing team on refreshing our ideal customer profiles, our corporate narrative, our messaging, our positioning. So much of that initial work had been done where it felt like really this creative and the visual aspect felt like it was the last piece of the puzzle.
Yeah. And this is a question I'm always curious about and always kind of get onto when we talk about these things. Is your leadership team, are they design focused? Are they open to conversations around design and creativity, or not so much?
Yeah, for sure. I feel really blessed to work here because I think, especially our marketing leadership is so design and creative sort of savvy. I think a company, I think one of the first tech companies I worked at, it was a small startup and it doesn't exist anymore. So it's okay. I can talk about it. But I think the CMO said to me, I think he was so, I think, what did he say to me? He was like, oh, you just sort of do whatever you want. It doesn't really sort of matter to me. And I'm like, I actually think I'd rather be in an environment where I have sort of leadership that actually does invest in care and have a little bit more opinions, on creative and design. As nice as that other situation, may sound, I think you want to engage, in that conversation and feel like it matters and it's important.
Yeah, definitely. And again, on the agency side, we have clients come to us, or prospective clients come to us, with all sorts of different, from all sorts of different businesses, from all sorts of different backgrounds. But one of the things we always try and eke out is the business, creatively minded from the top down. What's their opinion on creativity? What's their opinion on design? What's their opinion on brand? And it's not so much that, if it's something that doesn't matter as much to them, it's a deal breaker. Mm-hmm. But often it does make things a little bit more difficult when you're trying to sell in the value of what you're doing, because ultimately, as you say, the people at the top of the tree are going to sign off the checks. And as you say, it's not just around, does somebody like something? Is something going to be liked in the market? But actually, what's the business case for it? How's it going to deliver on the bottom line ultimately? And how's it going to aid that bottom line? Because, I'm sure you'll agree, I'm preaching to the converted here, but brand, it has this amazing, actually one of our previous podcast guests, Katie Rosa, says this a lot. It has irrational value.
Mm.
It drives bottom line in the way that it really shouldn't, because,
Mm-hmm.
it's not something that you can see, feel, touch so much, but it's intangible, but it's also tangible. But then when you have a leadership team who don't necessarily believe or buy into that, it can just make things a little bit more difficult. But it sounds like that's definitely not the case for you guys there.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Nice.
It's great to have great partners to work with, for sure.
Nice. Listen, there's something, I'm a little bit conscious of time, and I could talk to you about this all day, to be honest. I really, really could. It's such a fascinating subject. But I wanted to get on to one of the most fascinating parts of this fascinating subject for me, and especially talking to you from Asana, which is distinctive brand assets. You guys have those in abundance, and people love them. So when you're going through this process, how do you kind of, again, we've got that word again, balance. How do you balance the care and attention for your kind of community and your customers' views with, I suppose, what you're ultimately trying to achieve with this piece, which is change?
Yeah, for sure. So I think once we start to talk about, you know, brand assets and distinctive brand assets, it's definitely getting into this territory where it's not just about the art, but it's about the science as well. And so at Asana, we've got, you know, a few different brand assets that are research backed that really sort of help folks. You know, it triggers sort of Asana in the memory of folks once they see them. So for us, we say we have three. So our most distinct one is our three dot symbol, and really that was designed many, many years ago to represent, you know, the coming together of folks and represent teamwork. And our brand color is called coral. That's another asset for us. And then our unicorn is our third distinctive brand asset. And so it's our purple unicorn with a rainbow trail. And so I guess for those that don't know, you know, we have a cast, we like to say, of mostly mythical creatures at Asana, and they really fly across the product when you complete a task, when you complete a milestone, when you complete a goal. And so we've got a unicorn, a yeti, a phoenix, a narwhal, and an otter. So not all mythical, but that's okay. And so it kind of really started over like a decade ago. You know, an Asana engineer introduced the unicorn as actually as an April Fool's joke and an Easter egg in the product. And so the users fell in love with it. And so, you know, a few more were introduced over time. And now we even use the unicorn in marketing because, you know, the brand recognition is right up there with our logo and our primary color. But I think, you know, when we're talking about refreshing our, you know, a couple years ago, refreshing our illustration style kind of came up the conversation of really giving these creatures a little bit of a glow up as well. And obviously it's such a highly sensitive, you know, area because they are DBAs, but also our users are so passionate and really not shy about, you know, telling us what they like and dislike. And so the first time the unicorn was actually refreshed all the way back in 2015, and someone started a change.org petition to get it back to the original one. I think the original one, I don't know, it might have even been clip art, but it had like this tail and it had the words like hooray sort of like in the tail. It was giving kind of like Lisa Frank vibes, which I think now actually looks pretty cool. I think we should bring it back and put it on a t-shirt or something. But we obviously just wanted to approach it with so much care and love because we know that our users, you know, have a lot of love for them as well. So we worked with an agency here in San Francisco. They're called Stout Design, and we iterated on them, you know, many, many times to kind of hit this sweet spot of being, you know, a little bit more mature and smarter looking, but, you know, still consistent and maintaining, you know, that brand recognition that a lot of folks sort of have with them. And also we wanted to avoid backlash. You know, we don't want to change that org petition. So we proactively got the user community involved. We gave them a poll. We wrote a special, you know, post to revealing the work to them in the community forum before it went public. And I think that really, really, you know, helped set us up for success. You know, when we on the launch day, I was sort of digging around through Twitter to see if I can see any rumblings of any reactions, but the only one that I found was, you know, someone saying, I'm not sure if I love them or hate them. And you know what? I think I will take that over a change.org petition. So
I don't know. I think creating that kind of uh, that reaction, I suppose, that slightly incendiary reaction, may not always be a bad thing. At least it shows that people feel something, which is amazing. I just had a question on. You mentioned about the science behind it and the fact that you guys look into a lot of research around this. Are you talking about? Because obviously you've got kind of organisations like Ehrenberg Bass who do a lot of research around distinctive brand assets generally. Are you talking more about kind of research in terms of keeping your finger on the pulse with your customers and your audience and how they feel, and feeding that back in as a research piece, or maybe a bit of both?
yeah, so our brand marketing team, I want to say every year or twice a year, they keep a little bit of a pulse, on, our recognition and sort of memory in the market. How do folks sort of recognize Asana? I think it's a little bit quantitative and qualitative when they sort of talk to folks, and then they sort of let us know, and I think it informs, some of the decisions that we make. So I think when they did that research initially, and we found out that actually, the unicorn isn't just, this fun thing that we have. Folks are actually recognizing Asana through it. It kind of sort of lit a fire under us of like, okay, well, what are other ways that we can introduce the unicorn sort of into our marketing? So, for example, at the end of our campaign videos, maybe we have the unicorn sort of fly by over the product. So it's just been kind of a nice, back and forth between, brand marketing and creative on uh, doing that balancing act of, the science behind it, and then obviously the art.
Nice. And where are you with this at the moment? Are you is the process done? Are you still working through things?
Yes, it is officially done. We got our guidelines from Collins just a couple days ago, and so now we are just really hitting the ground running and starting to test out on a few different surfaces.
Nice, awesome. That must be such a relief to
Yeah,
finally
yeah,
be
yeah.
there. These things are so trying and testing for for you guys and the team, and obviously the fact that you've also got your day jobs to work on as well. You've got things to do, you've got jobs to be done. I mean, in terms of the finished article, I suppose, how do you feel about it? How would you I don't know, is there a word that you'd use to describe it in particular?
Yeah, I think the new brand for us, it's a bit more, it's a bit bolder, it's a bit more vibrant, it's a bit more confident, uh, and certainly consistent. That was something that we wanted to keep an eye on for a long time. And yeah, it's funny. We revealed it to the marketing team yesterday, and it was like a 6 month labor of love for us. So I kind of forget that, like, oh, a lot of folks haven't seen this work yet. So it was kind of fun to reveal it to folks yesterday.
Awesome. I can't wait to see it myself. I really can't. And actually, so how's the process been? Obviously, you mentioned you've been a part of a few rebrand processes. Now this one's done and dusted. How does it compare to previous ones? Is it kind of more challenging, not so challenging, pretty smooth? How does it compare to previous ones that you've kind of undertaken in the past?
Um, I don't know. I mean, I feel like, I like we said, everyone is so different. I think this one, I think early on, it took a couple of, iterations, I think, to really sort of get to a place where, all of us were like, yes, I think sort of this is it, Um, I think, maybe it's easy to have this expectation of like, oh my gosh, we're gonna sort of like nail it, on the first try, and it's like waving a magic wand, and it's super easy. But it actually I think it takes a lot of work to get to a place where you just have so many inputs and so many sort of like considerations that you just really want to get to a place where you feel like this is right for the brand. This is where we need to go. It feels like a natural evolution, and also everyone is super happy with it as well.
That's what counts. That's what really counts. And I'm sure that your customers, partners, colleagues will all be really happy with it as well, I'm sure. Nick, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to me about this. As I said, it's a conversation that, I'd love to go on and on, but ultimately it's been amazing, really, really insightful. I'm sure our audience will feel the same way. I just wanted to end actually with a question that, to be honest with you, I'd quite like to ask all of our guests, really, especially creative directors that come onto the podcast. But my question to you is, if you could rebrand any company, if you could work at any company and go through a rebrand process right now, which one would you choose?
Yeah, I was thinking a lot about this, and I really think uh, Canva feels ripe for a refresh, only because we're just talking about, in the last couple of weeks of bringing it on as a tool for non-designers, at the company to feel empowered to create templates in the new brand and create a little bit more of a self-serve sort of motion for the folks here at Asana. And so I feel like they've captured, the hearts and minds of so many non-designers. I know our marketing team they love Canva and they're so excited to use it, but I really think there's an opportunity to almost go through some sort of like Figmification and really win over designers as well. I think if they can win over that audience as well, I think they'll be unstoppable.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. And actually, we've spoken during this conversation about the need to evolve and refresh your brand as you go up market. I mean, I don't think it's any secret that Canva, they're targeting Adobe. They're coming after Adobe.
Mm-hmm.
They're coming after that audience. And actually, speaking of Figma, the fact that Adobe didn't end up that acquisition going through, I think, pours fuel on that fire in terms of Canva thinking, actually, we can do this. I'm sure you saw, was it this week or last week? Big old acquisition, to really kind of supercharge all of that. And shout out to Serif, who they acquired through is it Affinity? I can't remember.
Affinity,
I think that's the company yeah. So Serif is part of Affinity. Serif's from my hometown of Nottingham. So
nice.
$100 million going to some folks from Nottingham. Well done, guys. But that side, I mean, yeah, I think it's a super interesting point, and I'm sure it's going to happen pretty soon. And I can't wait to see who does it. I can't wait to see what the result is. But yeah, that's a great shout. Actually, that's a really, really good shout. It's Canva's coming for everyone. It's just a matter of time. Thanks, Nick. Thank you so much. You've been an amazing guest on the Changemakers. Really great conversation. I really, really appreciate your time. Thank you for coming on the Changemakers.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was such a fun conversation. Appreciate you.